One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's Bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Okay, I have to start this podcast here today with a question. And that question is, are you dealing with so many competing priorities that sometimes you just feel like your head is spinning? There's just too many things to focus on. I got to do this first. No, I actually have to do this first. No, wait, I can't forget about this thing because it's just going to sneak up and attack me and try to haunt me in my sleep if I don't take care of it right now. It's like I should have got all this done yesterday. You are not alone if these have been your thoughts. So today we are going to talk all about competing priorities for your podcast. So let's get to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? So like I said in the beginning, today we are talking about competing priorities. Now, this is something that I think my role as a mom and being a stay-at-home mom has helped me kind of navigate the world of competing priorities. Don't get me wrong, my experience as a working mom definitely plays into this as well, but I think being at home and having to raise the kids and do all the things and check all the boxes and make sure do we have enough milk in the house, and is everybody done, is the laundry clean, and just worrying about all the things that I've done in my personal life has kind of helped me understand what I need to focus on in my podcast journey. So there are 6 competing priorities I want to talk about today, and I'm going to give you my opinion on which ones I think that you, as a podcast student, That's what we're going to call you. We're going to call you a podcast student of the day. Let's think about this like we are having a coaching call and you have come to me and said, there are 6 competing priorities with my podcast. Which one do I need to focus on first? So I'm going to list them out and then we're going to dive into each one separately. So the first competing priority is content. Then we move into audio, then our listeners, then growth, engagement, and marketing. So these are at any given time after you've launched. So we're making the assumption that you've already launched your podcast. So if you have not launched, it's okay. Stay tuned because these are some of the things that you're going to eventually face. But if you've already launched your podcast, you may have already found yourself struggling with competing priorities. Like, which one do I focus on this today? Like, should I focus on this next week, next month? When should I focus on what? Please tell me. That's what I'm assuming, that you have come to me and asked this question, because I've had people ask me this question. So here are my thoughts. So we're going to run through all 6 of these and what I actually mean by the different ones. And then I'm going to tell you, if you came to me with certain scenarios, what advice I would give you. So number 1 is content. So I believe that there are 2 ways to approach content. Now, I produce lots of content. If you don't know this already, I have a daily podcast that I put out episodes Monday through Friday, literally every day. And then I have the Profit Podcast, which it comes out twice a week. So there is a lot of content on top of social media posts and sending out my emails every week and doing YouTube, like all the things. There is a lot of content coming out. Like I'm imagining like my house, like being, I'm thinking of like birds flying out of my house. Like that's all the pieces of content. Okay, I'm a huge fan of The Office, if you don't know this already. And I totally just pictured whenever they're having their wedding, right? It's Dwight and Angela, they're getting married and they're opening the basket. Mose opens the basket and he's hoping like to have this momentous occasion where these doves fly out, and sometimes they don't really come out. Like he has to kick the basket and then the doves start flying out. That is how I imagine my podcast runs some days. Like some days, like all the content comes out of my ears and it's just like beautiful flowing system. And then other days it's like I got to kick the basket to get the content out because I either don't feel like writing like a post for Instagram, or I don't want to do the show notes for my episode. So whenever I speak about content, that is what I'm talking about. Not just podcast episodes. I'm talking about all the other facets that go into creating a podcast. So again, that goes back to your actual episode, the episode descriptions you have to create in Buzzsprout, whether you do show notes or not, and then all of the marketing that goes into it. So this is what I'm saying when I refer to content. So I'm going to go down and talk about, there are episodes that I'm going to link to in the show notes that I want you to check out, crystalprofit.com/episode 159. And that's where you're going to see just different ways that you can come up with content. Now, I don't know, because I like I said, we're imagining we're on a coaching call right now, but I don't know if content is something that you struggle with. But I am going to give you some of my resources. So I have 2 YouTube videos on creating a content calendar. This can absolutely help you with your content strategy. And then I have an episode that's 9 ways to brainstorm podcast content. Like maybe once you have an idea, it's fine to like, you can, oh yeah, I can talk about this and I can talk about this. And this is a great strategy that I can apply to this. But maybe you have issues coming up with the ideas in the first place. So that's what I'm assuming. I'm just making a lot of general assumptions here of what your issues with content are, but I want you to go check those out because those can definitely help you if content is a priority, and it should be. It should always be a priority for your podcast. Now, the other thing I'll say about it is if coming up with the content and doing it every single week exhausts you, then I'm going to encourage you to batch. I have an episode all about how to batch your podcast and what that could possibly look like for you. Again, that's going to be in the show notes. But the reason why I'm suggesting batching to people who struggle with content is there are cycles that you go throughout like a month, and it definitely plays into how your brain works and functions on a daily basis. Now, there was a book called Do Less by Kate Northrup, and she introduced the idea of comparing your life, your business, and whatever you do to the cycles of the moon. And, for the ladies listening out there, she's actually talking about like your feminine cycles, that every woman goes through every month. But I know there's some guys listening, and I'm not going to gross y'all out and talk about all the things, but we are going to talk about the moon cycles and how everybody goes through cycles every single month. So there's going to be a certain week, like we're going to assume there's 4 weeks in a month. There's going to be one that you are just totally on fire. You're like, man, I could create 50 podcast episodes this week and just feel amazing about it. I don't have to force myself to have energy. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling confident. I like my shoulders back. Like I am ready to rock and freaking roll. Then you're going to have weeks where you're like, it's okay. I mean, like I'm still good. I'm not super jazzed up, but I can get the job done. No problem whatsoever. Then you're going to have weeks where you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm here. I'm dragging and this is hard, but I'm here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this work. And then you're going to have days or a week where you want to set everything on fire. And I say that and I laugh because it's totally true. If you've ever felt that way, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is men and women. This is not just women, but like where you're just like, I don't want to do this. I'm doing this wrong. Everything feels wrong. Somebody, I got a 1-star review and maybe they were right and I am terrible. What am I even doing? I'm not good enough to do this. I should just quit. Like all the thoughts. And I'm not saying you have these when you first start out. I still have these thoughts to this day. I just know how to work through them and process them easier. So why am I bringing all this up, right? Like moon phases and cycles and all these other things. I'm bringing this up because the content must go on. Even if you're having a bad week, you got to suck it up. You committed to this podcast. You better suck it up and go all in. Like I'm going to give you a pep talk and tell you like, remember, we're on a coaching call here. You got to suck it up. I don't care if you don't feel like it. You got to make it work. If you are committing to having a podcast and showing up every single week, you need to suck it up and make it work. Now, where, maybe you're like, whoa, that's super harsh. Where did this come from? Well, this comes from the excuses that people give me about why they can't have consistent content. They're like, well, yeah, but I don't feel right and I didn't have time and I didn't do this and I didn't do that. Then batch your episodes.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Ooh, it just got silent. Do you hear that? Batch your episodes. That takes the excuse out of, I don't feel like it, I can't do it. And it shoves it all into one of those weeks where you're going to feel awesome. You're going to feel amazing. You know that you are due for a good week. That's when you need to batch all of your episodes. Do it all at once, get it done, and then you no longer have a competing priority of content because the content is done. Okay, I feel like I'm just going to keep going on a tangent on that, and we're just going to kind of wrap it up. So that's one. We're going to talk about your content. The next one is your audio. Now, this is a competing priority really only when you're first getting started, because once you figure out your audio, you're going to know, okay, these are my issues. This is what I need to fix. And then it's going to be fixed. But If you've been podcasting for a while and you're getting feedback from people saying, yeah, your audio, it's kind of hard to listen to because it's really loud or it's crackly or it's a bad connection. I could tell your internet was messed up whenever you recorded that interview because it kept dropping and then there was a really bad echo and all these other things. Like audio will always be a competing priority, but it's also not at the top of the list. So it is something you need to be aware of. But if people can listen to your show pleasantly, then it's fine. It's fine. You just need to figure out what works for you and test it every single time you sit down to record. Still to this day, and I tell you all this, I do like a mic check 1 2 1 2 where I'm pretending I'm a DJ. I do that every single time because audio is a priority for me. And I always make sure that it sounds decent when I start recording. That way I don't have to do as much editing. You guys, like, plan ahead, like, do these small things ahead of time to make your life easier. That is what we are shooting for. And then the next competing priority could be your listeners. Now, your listeners should be something that you have figured out, even like as you get started and going forward, you should know who your audience is, but it's also a competing priority to continue to understand them. Because I can tell you right now, my listeners have evolved, and that makes me so happy. So happy because as my listeners have evolved, they want different things from me. Like if you've been listening to this podcast since we first launched it, then you no longer need to know how to start a podcast because you hopefully have started and launched a podcast. Now you're like, well, how do I get to the next level? How do I talk more about podcast marketing? How can I incorporate my business more organically into my podcast? How can I work on strategy? How can I get on more shows? Like you are evolving, and I am just in awe of how incredible this podcast community is. But I have to pay attention to that. I can't keep talking about the same thing over and over and over again. If all this podcast was about starting a podcast, you guys, I would be bored to tears. I would be bored to tears because although, yes, I know how to give you, tips on getting started and all the things, that's not all I want to talk about because I know that's only one piece of the puzzle. That's not the whole puzzle. So competing priority number 3 is your listeners. You have to listen to them. So, and like I said, I'm going to kind of run through these and then we're going to go into how you can rank these or really pay attention to which ones are most important. I believe that listeners are more important than your audio because once you get your audio figured out, your listeners are definitely up there on the list. So the next one is growth. Now, growth is separate from marketing because I listed marketing last. So growth is actually getting more downloads, actually growing your numbers, getting more listeners. That is totally different than marketing because marketing is the action of doing all these things, but growth is actually evaluating, are you growing? Are you growing? You have to pay attention to these numbers. So if you've listened to the podcast before and you have heard me talk about this, I like to plan my year all at once. I do quarterly reviews and I have goals for the month. I have goals for the week. I have goals for my day. Every single day, I have something that I am aiming towards. And it usually doesn't change. It's not like I have, there's 52 weeks in a year. I don't have 52 different goals. There's usually one main goal every single quarter that I'm shooting for. And then of that one goal, there is specific things I do each week to work towards that goal. So my question to you, as we are on this coaching call, is what is your goal? What are you actually reaching for? Because if you tell me, well, I don't know, I'm hoping that things work out. I'm hoping that my numbers will, go up. That's not, no, that's just, hope is not a good strategy. Hope is not a way to reach more people. Hope is kind of complacency, just hoping that things will get better, hoping that, something better will come along. I don't want you to do that. So instead, what I want you to do when it comes to growth and focusing on that as a priority for your podcast is write down your numbers. Write them down. And if you don't know where to get started with goals, I'll link to this in the show notes. There's another, it's called Podcast Goals, like what to aim for. And, or that's for launch goals. There's another one about goals that I want you to check out. But I talk about how you can't just like assume what your numbers are going to be. I want you to write them down. And if you don't know where to get started, then just say, okay, 1 month from now, I want to have doubled my numbers. That's a pretty audacious goal to reach for. And it's totally doable because I've done it. I've done it a few months in a row, but if I don't hit that mark, I don't beat myself up about it. I don't say, oh my gosh, you're terrible. You should just quit. Like, why are you even trying? I just say, dang it. I did not make my goal this month. What can I do better? How can I actually grow? And how you'll get there is your marketing strategies. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because I listed engagement next. So let's talk about engagement and then we'll move on to marketing. So when I say engagement, that's different than me just listing out like my listeners, because yes, I have to understand my listeners. I have to know how they're growing, how they're evolving, and what they want to hear from me. But engagement is actually talking to them. Like you're not just a fly on the wall of a Facebook group seeing like, ooh, what are people talking about? I'm just going to eavesdrop on all these conversations. No, you actually have to have real engagement. Like get out from behind your microphone and actually talk to people. I'm not saying you have to sit down and have coffee with every single one of your listeners, but you should have a forum that allows for open engagement to where people can ask you questions. People can approach you and learn more about your business, your podcast, what you do, how you can help them. Because when you open up that line of communication, that engagement starts rolling. And you guys, there's just so many endless possibilities that can happen once you open the doors for a conversation. It's almost like you're pulling up a chair to the table to sit down and have coffee with someone. But if there aren't any chairs there or there's no table, then there's not an opportunity for you to engage with your people. I want you to engage. And if you don't know what that looks like, go check out the episode that I did about having a Facebook group for your podcast. If you don't know where else to start, that's where you should start. You should create a community for your podcast for people to talk, for people to ask you questions, people to collaborate and talk to each other. I think that that's the easiest place to start because it doesn't involve in-person events. It doesn't involve you setting up Zoom calls and making sure that you're talking to every single person in your community. It just allows for people to start the conversation or to ask you a question. And that, my friends, is where the real engagement starts to take place. And oh my gosh, like I think about all the things I've gotten from my podcast community and the Facebook group in there, the questions that y'all ask, like I am just so blown away by the awesome questions because they're things that I never would have thought of. And I will take those questions and bring them here to this podcast or go create a YouTube video that will help so many more people. So if you're already a member of the Facebook community, thank you so much for being a member and just hanging out in there. I hope that you use the community because it's totally free. And I hope that you use it to collaborate with other podcasters, learn from them, because while I love sitting here and telling you my perspective, I hope that you learn from others that are in there. Just recently, I had somebody who had, she reached out about her podcast category. And I did not have the answer for her because her category was something it wasn't related to business or marketing or podcasting. It was something totally different I did not have experience in. But somebody else in the community stepped up and said, oh, this is related to my podcast category. Here's what I did. And just seeing that, like, it's those little things. And this is so cheesy. And I'm like, don't say it, but I'm going to tell you anyway. I almost cried, you guys. Like, I almost started bawling because I saw these two people collaborating in a community that I had created. And it just felt so incredible that these two people who would have never crossed paths otherwise were talking and collaborating. And who knows, who knows? Because I know both of them have podcasts about motivation and helping grieving people overcome some of their traumas and the things that they've dealt with in their life. And I just imagine like how many people they will help and continue to help as time goes on. And that's just, oh, it's so powerful. It's absolutely powerful to see that happening and unfolding. And that's what can happen in a podcast community that you've created for engagement. And all it takes is just getting started and creating something, a safe space for people to collaborate and talk about things related to your podcast. Okay, so the last thing I want to dig into when it comes to priorities is marketing. Marketing is so broad. It's just such a topic that we could take in 1,000 different directions. And I'm so impressed by some of the ideas that I've seen in the community about how you can market your podcast. Because again, there's things that I don't know. I don't know everything. I don't. And I will never sit behind this microphone and tell you that I know everything there is to know about marketing and podcasting and equipment and all things under the sun that even have something slightly remotely related to podcasting. I will never say that because I'm still learning every single day. But I can tell you that marketing should be one of your highest priorities because you can focus on the content, you can focus on your listeners, you can focus on all the things that have to do with your podcast. But if you aren't telling people about it, no one's ever going to find it. They're not. Like, I mean, there's so many tricks under the sun when it comes to SEO and like, you know, trying to cheat the algorithms to make sure that this, no. You have to decide and you have to develop your own strategies for marketing your podcast. And I think that that should be one of your highest priorities. I think like you have to pay as much attention to how you're going to talk about your podcast as you do talking to your podcast. Talking to your podcast? Talking to your microphone? You know what I mean, right? Because I'm just saying talking. That's what you have to do to create your podcast. You have to talk. So spend as much time focusing on marketing as you do actually creating the content. And I know some people are going to say, yeah, but I gotta create the content. That's just so important. I have to create, I have to edit. Nope. For people out there listening, if you are struggling with time spent on editing your podcast and it is draining you and you're just like, I don't know how much longer I can do this, I would rather see you spend more time, effort, energy, all the things on marketing than spending 4 more hours editing out all the ums in your podcast. Do you know what you could do with 4 hours of marketing when you leave all those ums in and you leave like those deep breaths that you took or whenever you had to like sneeze or you accidentally coughed or your kids came in or your dog barked or you heard like even just a second ago, my dog walked by, Wally, and you could hear his little chains, his chains, whatever they are, like his dog tags were like jingling on his collar. You probably heard it. I'm not going to edit that out because that's time getting taken away from spending, I could be marketing, I could be planning more content as opposed to editing out all the things to make it sound quote unquote perfect. So those are the 6 priorities that there are. There are probably other ones. These are the ones that I could think of. Like whenever I sit down to create my podcast, what are the things that I'm thinking about? And if I were to rank these, this is going to be in the show notes. And it's funny because I wrote these down, like the things that I was thinking, okay, we need to talk about these, but I didn't actually put these in chronological order of how I would tell you to do this. So I'm showing my true colors here. I'm totally unprepared to do this chronologically. I'm going to do this on the spot. So I'm getting a little nervous now. I'm like, hang on, let's do this without totally messing this up. So if I were to give a number, if I were to assign a number on these 6 things based on which ones I think are most important, I would say that content would be number 1. I would still say, because you cannot have a podcast without content and you cannot keep showing up every week for your audience if you don't have actual content planned, created, done, ready to go, ready to record. So content is number one. And I don't just mean content as in throw something together. I'm talking about valuable content. I would rather see you spend more time creating your content than editing your content, because when you do that, when you spend more time planning, you actually don't have to edit as much because you know what you're talking about and you're not spacing out and you're not messing up and you're not losing your train of thought. You are speaking what you want to talk about on your podcast. So content would be number one. I would have to say, and I'm just going to kind of jump around here for a second, and these are going to be listed way better in the show notes. I'm going to say the audio is last. Audio would be number 6, because once you have that figured out, this should not be a competing priority that you worry about every single week. Like I said, you need to talk, it is a priority still. You definitely need to do your mic checks. You need to make sure that your audio sounds clear. It sounds great. It's not scratchy. You're not getting weird noises in the background, but it shouldn't be something that you lose sleep over once you figure out how to have good audio for your podcast. So I'm just going to throw that one down to the very bottom. Now, this is where we get the messy middle, right? Because you have your listeners, growth, engagement, and marketing. I would say we have content is number 1. The second most important, if I were to pick one of these, would be engagement. Engagement would be the second most important. Now, engagement and listeners, honestly, would have to be like kind of tied for second, but I'm going to list them out separately. So content would be number 1, engagement is number 2, and then your listeners would be number 3. The reason why I say that is because if you focus more on engagement, you like kind of by osmosis, by happenstance, you will understand more about your listener the more that you engage with them. And I think that this is so important. So if you're creating a community, don't just create a community to say, oh, I have 20,000 people in this Facebook group and it's amazing, because then I'm going to ask you, what are you doing to engage with people there? Like, what is the point of your group? Are you learning more? Are you actually getting content ideas? Are you learning what they want from you? Are you creating deeper relationships with your listeners? And if you look at me with like a blank stare across your face, I'm going to say that group does not matter if you are not engaging with your people. So that would be number 2. And then number 3 is continuing always to understand your listeners. This could be from surveys and polls and asking them, what do you want to hear from me? What stage are you at? I started doing this on my YouTube channel. I'll ask, what is your podcast about? Or what is your business? There was a recent video where we were talking about sharing customer stories on your podcast and how to do it. And the question that I ask is, what is your actual business? Because I'm genuinely curious. The people that watch my YouTube channel may be totally different than the people that listen to this podcast. So I want to know that. I want to know if the people watching on YouTube are wanting to start a different kind of podcast than what I teach, because if that's the case, I'm going to have to let them know, like, this is for entrepreneurs. This isn't for hobby podcasters or people that want to start a true crime podcast. That's awesome that that's your jam, but that's not what I teach. And that's not what I focus on. So being very mindful of who your listeners are and what they want from you is very important, because these trickle back up to your content and making sure that your content is priority. So it just kind of makes your job a little bit easier. The next one I would focus on, number 5, would be growth. Oh, sorry, I skipped ahead. I forgot. We shoved audio down to the bottom. So number 4 would be, no, hang on. I totally said this wrong. Okay, hang on. Y'all, just bear with me for a second, because like I said, I'm doing this on the spot and I totally just lost everything that I was talking about here. So I have to write out my numbers. Okay, so content is number 1. Then we have the engagement with your audience. And then number 3, we have your listeners. Number 4 is marketing. And then 5 is growth and 6 is audio. So I believe that engaging with your audience and understanding your listener better will help you become a better marketer. It will make the marketing process easier because, and if you follow me on social media, you see this all the time. You'll see that I say, oh, I had the question of, even this podcast is a perfect example. I had the question posed in a group that, as you know, someone asked me, how do you deal with competing priorities with your podcast? I would not know that had I not been paying attention to the engagement happening in the podcast communities that I'm a part of. I wouldn't even know that that was a concern of anybody. But now that I do, I can use that in my marketing. I can say, I'm paying attention. I see you, and I'm working that into my marketing strategy as I talk about this show. So that's why it's important. You can't just totally drop marketing down to the bottom of your priorities. You need to know how you're going to talk to your listeners about your podcast, because you can't grow. That's the next one, is you cannot grow if you're not talking about your show, if you're not talking about what was on your latest episode of your podcast, or who your upcoming guest is, or the amazing topics that you're covering this week on your podcast. You can't grow. That's just, you might be able to attract listeners up to a certain point, but you're going to find yourself pretty stagnant if you don't actively market your podcast. So growth would be the next one. And I do think that you should focus on growth. I think that it's not something you have to visit every single week. Like, okay, how am I going to grow the podcast this week? How am I going to grow it? But I think that it's something that you should deal with at least on a monthly basis. I know whenever I do plan my year, I look at all the different promotions and sales and affiliate programs that I'm going to be a part of. And I think, how can I plug my podcast? Because most of the time, especially if I'm dealing on someone else's platform, I don't just come out right and say, go buy my program. You should join my course. You should spend hundreds of dollars on my program because it's awesome. No, the first thing I tell them is, oh, go listen to my podcast. It's totally free. It's very what's the word? It's non-committal, right? I'm not asking them to shell out hundreds of dollars the first time they hear me. I'm inviting them to join in the conversation with me on my podcast. Then once they get to the podcast, that's when I tell them, like, oh, hey, go join my free Facebook group. We have a lot of fun in there. We share stories, we hang out, we sing Kumbaya. I'm just kidding. We totally would not do that. And y'all do not want to hear me sing whatsoever. But I'm just saying, you have to focus on how are you going to grow. Now, I have a few episodes that I'll link to in the show notes about growing by guesting on other podcasts. There are several episodes we have about this, and I will link to all of those. But I think that that's one of the best ways that you can grow your podcast, is getting in front of someone else's audience, whether that's on a podcast, a Facebook Live show, someone else's YouTube video, whatever that looks like. I think that offering up what you have, the knowledge that you're already sharing on your show, and sharing that in front of someone else's audience can be very beneficial to growth. So, and then the last one's audio. We already talked about that. So I'm going to list these we already had the chronological order. Now I'm going to have the competing priority of the competing priority order. I was going to say chronological. It's not chronological. Oh my gosh, you guys. I'm just going to list the ones that I think, if you were sitting here on this coaching call with me, you would be like, Crystal, get your shiitake together, because you are just totally messing this up. But this is what I would tell you to focus on first. I want you to focus on your content, because the more content you produce and the more confident you feel about it, it's going to make all of these other priorities easier for you. So focus on your content, then focus on the engagement with your listeners. Talk to your listeners. Don't just talk at them, talk to them. Figure out what they want from you. Get to know them, get to understand them, because that makes your life that much more easier. And I promise you, they will tell you what they want you to talk about. This is how it makes the content easier. Like, if you think about it like a waterfall, like we are just creating a waterfall of making your life easier when you focus on the right things. So focus on your content, focus on the engagement with your audience, and then focus on your listeners, really understanding them. Not just thinking like, okay, I talk to entrepreneurs who want to start an online business. Nope. You need to go deeper. You need to go way deeper than that. For me, I understand that most of y'all are concerned, or you feel overwhelmed with technology when it comes to starting your podcast or setting up your online business around your podcast. It makes you nervous. I get that, which is why we have so many episodes about not focusing on the content, or not the software, because it's not that big of a deal. It's not. Once you get it, you guys, audio is number 6 here. It's not number 1. Once you get it figured out, you don't need to know that. The content is more important. So the next one is marketing. you definitely need, if marketing is the lowest priority for you, you need to reevaluate some things because it doesn't need to be the lowest. It doesn't have to be number one, but it does not need to be the lowest for your priorities. You need to find time to focus on marketing every single week. Then the next one is growth. You need to evaluate how you're going to grow your podcast at least once a month. At least look at it and say, are my numbers increasing? How can I make them a little bit bigger? How can I reach more people? Can I get in front of other audiences? How can I increase my podcast audience? How can I grow? And then the last one's audio. Guys, once you figure out your audio, it's not something you have to deal with. It's not a priority that you should be competing with every single time you sit down to record. Get it figured out, figure out a system that works for you, and then just keep going. Keep going. But make your content your number one priority. That's my piece. That's what I'm going to say, because there are many other different directions we could take the conversation in and how you can have better content and all the things. But I just want to tell you how I deal with competing priorities, because I do this too. I have this same struggle every single week. And what do? I dedicate more time to content planning and preparation than anything else, because that is what makes my life so much easier. It makes the marketing easier. It helps me understand my audience better. And being able to engage with y'all makes my life better. And let's just be honest, it's so much more fun to know that I'm not just talking to a microphone by myself in this office, like on a Friday, just talking to myself because I have nothing else better to do. No, it's knowing that you are listening to this on the other end of the microphone that just makes me so happy. And to be honest, it's what keeps me coming back every single week. If after my first few episodes, there were no downloads and nothing happened and nobody told me that this podcast helped them so much, I would have stopped a long time ago, a long, long time ago. So I'm going to encourage you to keep evaluating your priorities and set them straight. Set them straight. Don't just hope that you'll figure it out one day. You need to set the boundaries for what the priorities are going to be for your podcast. And I promise you, your life will be so much easier once you focus on the right things. But that's all I have for you today. So make sure, go check out the show notes. Go check out all the episodes that we talked about here today. crystalprofit.com/episode 159. And if this is your first time tuning in, I would love for you to subscribe to the show. Leave us a review wherever you're listening to this podcast. That helps push this content out in front of more people. And I love reading your comments. I do. There's been some fantastic reviews, and I used to read them on here, and I need to start doing that again because I'm just so humbled by the words that y'all have said and the messages that you share, saying that this podcast has helped you so much because you felt super lost. You didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do. And that's what keeps me coming back every single week. So I so appreciate every rating and review that you have left. But that's all I have for you today. So remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.